Welcome everyone to the North Texas Church of Freethought. This is our Zoom event of April 24th, 2022. So in a moment we'll be talking about banning religion. But first, please remember that we're out there on Facebook and Twitter as well. If you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe. I think you have to click a bell icon and also comment once you've watched and let us know what you think. Those of you participating live, go to YouTube later, search on Church of Freethought, subscribe if you haven't already, and also leave a comment. These days, social media is quite important, and it allows people like us, skeptics of traditional religions and their doctrines, to be heard. So let's be heard, and please help us do that. Quite a lot of effort goes into each one of our presentations, so please help us expand their impact. So here is a meme. We see these all over the internet, and we've used them for years in our services. This is, I think, meant to be funny. Here's one that is more serious. Here's more funny and serious both. And here's one that's going to contain references that not everyone will get. Actually mixing up, I think, about 3 different movies. And there are even memes that parody memes. Of course, memes were around before the internet. The word was coined by the well-known evolutionary biologist and unbeliever Richard Dawkins in his 1976 book, The Selfish Gene. What he had in mind was that ideas are replicated and passed around much like genetic material, and that this is actually the basis of humanity's understanding, our way of life, our culture, what really characterizes humanity. Best ideas survive, although best is seen in relation to the idea of survival. In other words, the best ideas may not be the ones that survive, but the ones that are most successful at replicating themselves, those are the best by that criteria. Other ideas don't survive, or they become modified to serve a different purpose, just like pieces of DNA. In the second edition of Dawkins' book, here's what the passage reads. We need a name for the new replicator, a noun that conveys the idea of a unit of cultural transmission or a unit of imitation. My meme comes from a suitable Greek root, but I want a monosyllable that sounds a bit like gene. I hope my classicist friends will forgive me if I abbreviate my meme to meme. If it is any consolation, it could alternatively be thought of as being related to memory or to the French word meme. Others would thereafter take up this very fruitful idea and establish the scientific discipline of mimetics, paralleling the science of genetics. Dawkins himself later in the 1990s advanced the idea of viruses of the mind, memes that can be harmful. He identified these specifically with religious doctrines and practices. We could, and people doubtless have, made all sorts of further connections with how ideas and elements of ideas spread and multiply, sometimes harming and at other times helping, just like selfish pieces of DNA. And as with genetics, much may depend on circumstances. Certainly, ideas that get into people's brains, the pieces of our culture that cause those people to die off are not going to be successful. Also, some ideas get along better with the ones that are already there. Indeed, even very bad entrenched ideas may keep better ones from getting a foothold. Some ideas are easier to transmit, others harder, and like bits of genetic code, ideas spread further and faster when there is a super spreader, maybe a popular media outlet or celebrity that helps to disseminate them. So there are lots of ideas there about how ideas are generated and spread. Now, when it comes to memes as graphics with a caption, often a quote, that circulate and reproduce on the internet, you might think these are pretty stable. Cutting and pasting happens with perfect accuracy, after all, on computers. But as we'll see in a moment, internet memes also mutate. In other words, people deliberately change them, but they may or may not do them for the same reason. It might, in some cases, be to make their point better. It might also just be because there's too many words and they want to shorten it. Bumper stickers are like that too. Frequently, there's just a few words, and it might not really communicate the idea as well as it might. And it's interesting to speculate about how and why these kinds of things mutate. So this meme, as you can see at the bottom, was created in 2018 by the FFRF as a free thought of the day. So that has Elton John saying, from my point of view, I would ban religion completely. The reality is that organized religion doesn't seem to work. It turns people into hateful lemmings, and it's not really compassionate. Elton John really did say this, too. Not like that Lincoln quote. This is a good time to point out that the FFRF, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, is a wonderful, it's an important organization, and if you don't know of it, you should. And if you haven't joined or supported it up to now, you should. I signed on as a life member some years ago. The FFRF is mainly concerned with the protection of state-church separation and other vital liberties that, as we know, have been under constant attack by Godist zealots since the founding of the nation. I hope you've gotten a chance to see some of the ads that the Freedom from Religion Foundation has run, especially the one with Ron Reagan there at the bottom right, who says, I'm an atheist and not afraid of burning in hell. The liberties hated by the zealots, of course, are those that they very forcefully insist that their deities object to. This includes reproductive freedoms, but it also includes the simple right to participate in society and the economy and to pursue happiness in the best way that one knows if you happen to be someone that their God hates or who may be exercising their free will in unapproved ways. Indeed, as we have observed on previous occasions, religious liberty is getting a bad name from zealots obsessed with using it to be exempted from laws prohibiting invidious discrimination and making public utilities out of women's bodies. And it is such a shame to see the government being co-opted into pursuing this type of agenda, while people who simply want to defend their freedoms have to hire private attorneys and sue the government to protect those liberties. But now look at this Elton John meme again. From this, it can be safely concluded, it seems, that Elton John really, really detests religion. Even his countryman, Richard Dawkins, there at the top left, doesn't hate religion enough to have ever called for it to be banned. Nor did Brit-turned-American Christopher Hitchens, who certainly hated Godism even more than Dawkins. Hitchens, by the way, became a U.S. citizen on his 58th birthday, April 13th of 2007, just about 15 years ago this month. Now, I haven't read every single word that these people wrote, but it seems to me that Dawkins sees traditional God-based religions as mostly huge, stupid, and repugnant mistakes. He sees them as affronts to reason, as most of us do. Hitchens, I think, saw this as well, and even more clearly, I think, saw that supernatural religious doctrines are an attack on human dignity and morals, sometimes overt and sometimes more subtly. But he did a very good job, the late Christopher Hitchens, of tracing out how these things happen. Yet Hitchens, even he, never suggested that religion be banned. His and Dawkins' approach, as well as every other prominent unbeliever I can think of, including those three across the bottom, has always been to shine a light on the absurdities and harms of Godism and other supernatural ideologies, trusting in sensible people to reject them on their own because they have no place in the minds of sensible people or a decent society. Sam Harris or Daniel Dennett or Gillette Penn, those three across the bottom there, ever suggested banning religion, I am not aware of it. But to suppose and to say bluntly that religion should be banned it's red meat for some atheists. I don't know what proportion of unbelievers this would include. Polls seldom drill down very deep into people's opinions on religious matters, but there are plenty of unbelievers who really get upset about abusive religious claims and especially intrusive religious practices, even if they take place in the private sector, people pushing their beliefs on you and threatening you with hell. I suspect these are just the people most likely to support the FFRF, the ones who object to that. Some of these unbelievers might very well not be satisfied with shoring up the wall of separation between state and church. They might very well not be satisfied with eliminating all tax exemptions for religion. They might very well not be satisfied with getting rid of "In God We Trust" on our money and "Under God" and the nation's official loyalty oath, and all the other many abuses with which we are familiar, as well as others that are less well known. Did you know, for example, that Medicare pays for Christian Science prayer, quote unquote, treatment? Wow. Well, keeping all these things in mind, it's not hard to sympathize with the view that if one had a magic wand, banning religion might be a very good use for it. But as a practical matter, banning something, legally prohibiting it, and even just defining what it is you want to prohibit comes with its own problems. How could anyone hope to ban religion understood as that which your heart clings to and confides in? That's Martin Luther's definition. Or one's total reaction upon life. That was a 19th century American psychologist and philosopher William James' way of putting it. Or as Paul Tillich put it, the liberal theologian, ultimate concern, a concern which qualifies all other concerns. Or, you see the last one there, a sincere and meaningful belief which occupies in the life of its possessor a place parallel to that filled by theistic belief. And that is the U.S. Supreme Court's version of what religion is. Very hard for the government to define religion since it's supposed to keep out of that whole sphere, but that was a clever way to sidestep that problem, and that's what they did in the 1965 Seeger decision, which was a unanimous Supreme Court decision. So what would it look like to try to ban these things? How would it be enforced? And would the result be what is intended, the wonderful world that sensible people want, or would the unintended consequences create a dystopian nightmare? It's often said that communist dictatorships like the old USSR worked to ban religion. But what was the result of 70 years of efforts to stamp out traditional religion and substitute the ideology of Marxism, Leninism in that country? And of course, they tried very hard to re-engineer human nature with all the brutal oppression that required. Well, we see today that the Russian Orthodox Church not only was not eliminated, but is a chief source of support for Vladimir Putin's regime, including his ongoing attack on Ukraine. Russia does not enjoy state-church separation, despite its history. Now, I did also consider that maybe the Brits have a different way of using the word ban to mean something other than to prohibit or forbid, typically as a matter of law. They say boot and bonnet, for example, to mean respectively the trunk and the hood of a car. I did find that there are quite a few such Britishisms where a word quite familiar to Americans, not just an unfamiliar word like they say aluminium instead of aluminum, but just a normal word familiar to Americans that means something quite different in the UK. For example, here's a short list. Might be good to review this if you plan to visit the UK, you plan to go to England, see the sights in London. Otherwise, you might go to buy some flowers, some marigolds, and be shown rubber gloves. Or you might ask about pants and be directed to the underwear department. You could be confused when you go to pick up your rental car and are told there is a $1,000 excess. Or if you are directed to the chemist to buy some aspirin. For sure, don't boast of how well you can dribble. Don't suppose you're being accused of being intoxicated if asked how many stone you are. But despite a search, I could not find that ban means anything different on the other side of the pond than here. It means the same there as here. In fact, in the Holy Roman Empire, that was in Europe, of course, remember that's on their side of the pond, someone could be placed under what they called an imperial ban. Such a ban was basically the Christian version of an Islamic fatwa, depriving the banned individual of all rights and property and allowing anyone to rob, hurt, or kill them, or anyone else giving aid to them, with no legal consequences. That was during the Middle Ages in Europe with the Holy Roman Empire. I suppose, though, that in current usage, a private party could still ban something on their own premises, sort of like putting up a sign that says, no shirt, no shoes, no service. Well, I wondered if Elton John had said more than just that he wanted to ban religion. What was the context for his saying this? Unlike most internet memes, the FFRF was helpful enough to give a source. And that's a very good idea. If you're going to put up things like this, give a source. So I was able to search and find this additional meme, which, as you can see, does not give the source. But as you see, the FFRF quote is a mutant that leaves out the underlined text. Maybe they just needed something shorter, but look at what those additional words say. Those additional words don't seem very consistent with the ones before and after, do they? Where he talks about wonderful things about religion, loving the idea of the teachings of Jesus Christ, and so forth. I think acknowledging wonderful things about the religion and the teachings of Jesus Christ and the beautiful stories and so on are not the sort of thing that go with the FFRF's aims. FFRF supporters would be unlikely to find much in those underlined words to agree with and motivate them to help support the organization. And those words certainly don't fit well with the idea of a complete ban on religion, do they? They almost suggest a kind of outburst followed by, as it said today, a sort of walking back of the idea of banning religion completely. It's as if, as soon as Elton John heard himself say he would ban religion completely, he realized that that maybe wasn't really what he meant, or that it might be taken the wrong way, or was going a bit too far from his calmer and more considered views on the subject of religion. So I was able to find the complete interview of Elton John in this Observer Music Monthly magazine, from which those passages were excerpted. This was a gay-themed November 2006 issue in which the interview appeared. It took place, the interview itself, on August 31st of that year. It was more of a discussion, actually, between Elton John and another musician, the other guy there, also shown on the cover. His name is Jake Shears. Quite lengthy, and if you have interest in either Elton John or the music business, or both, you might find it a good read. The context of the discussion is important in that they're talking about the AIDS epidemic and gay pride events that specifically concern the gay community. They get into this a little more when the interviewer, Shears, says, at the top there, to play a specifically gay event for me, meaning a musical event, is a backward step. I don't want to play gay events because I don't want anybody coming to the show thinking that they're not part of the group. Which Elton John responds saying, it's like when gay clubs won't let women in, and it's like, come on, we're all supposed to be together. I fucking hate it. And then after another comment by Jake, Elton John says, we've been isolated for so long, it's time we became integrated. Jake then refers to clubs in Berlin frequented by both gay and straight patrons, and this is where Elton John says, I just find it more human. We should all be together. I've got this really naive idea of what life should be like. It's an idealistic idea, but it's completely integrated. We can't keep thinking of gay people as being ostracized. We can't keep thinking of Muslim people as being ostracized because of the fundamentalism that occurs in Islam. Muslim people have to do something about speaking up about it. We can't judge a book by its cover. And this is where Elton John then makes his remark about banning religion. The next words. From my point of view, I would ban religion completely, even though there are some wonderful things about it. I love the idea of the teachings of Jesus Christ and the beautiful stories about it, which I loved in Sunday school. And I collected all the little stickers and put them in my book. But the reality is that organized religion doesn't seem to work. It turns people into hateful lemmings, and it's not really compassionate. Really, those last two sentences are the most telling. But there's a lot here, including the, as I said, the doesn't seem to work phrase, because some would say that organized religion is doing just what it intends. And what it intends is to do not such a very good thing. But what Elton John is complaining of here is the way in which the prevalent goddist religions stigmatize and exclude gays and divide people against each other. He allows that it may be a forlorn hope. He says he calls it a really naive idea that people should all live together in peace and tolerance. But most forms of Christianity and Islam make this harder instead of easier. That is what frustrates him, because so many of the followers of those religions adopt unthinking, automatic, and robotic habits of mind that drive everyone and the whole world to disaster. Poor lemmings, by the way, they've been slandered here. Lemmings do not commit mass suicide, much less run over cliffs en masse. They're small Arctic rodents. Their populations do seem to fluctuate greatly for reasons that are not fully understood. When there are surges in their numbers, they migrate in large groups in search of new habitat, and they may drown trying to swim across bodies of water, including the ocean, that are too much for them. But otherwise, they're just ordinary little Arctic rodents related to voles and muskrats, a subfamily of the rodents that is the most populous of rodents in the Northern Hemisphere, according to Wikipedia. So back to Elton John. Remember, this is 2006, 16 years ago. He gets more explicit about the disaster to which he thinks the sort of religions he has in mind are driving the world towards, the cliff that he sees the lemmings about to run over. He says, the world is near escalating to World War III, and where are the leaders of each religion? Why aren't they having a conclave? Why aren't they coming together? I said this after 9/11, and people thought I was nuts. Instead of more violence, why isn't there a meeting of religious leaders? It's all got to be dialogue. That's the only way. Get everybody from each religion together and say, listen, this can't go on. Why do we have all this hatred? We are all God's people. We have to get along, and the religious leaders have to lead the way. If they don't do it, who else is going to do it? They're not going to do it, and it's left to musicians or to someone else to deal with it. It's like the peace movement in the 60s. Musicians got through to people by getting out there and doing peace concerts, but we don't seem to do them anymore. We seem to be doing fundraisers for Africa and everything like that, but I think peace is really important. If John Lennon were alive today, he'd be leading it with a vengeance. Well, Elton John may have been alluding there to the 1971 song of John Lennon, a favorite of unbelievers, song Imagine. As we've said before, many times we've said it in many services, change of all sorts, improvements of any kind, advances in knowledge, innovations of technology, anything like that, begins with imagination, with asking, what if, maybe if things were this way or that. But it must be done in just the right way. No use to imagine, say, flying to the moon without having a grasp of what it takes to do that, and having in mind some means, some mechanism for it to happen. In other words, imagination is nothing unless it is also problem solving. For all life is problem solving, as the 20th century Austrian-British philosopher Karl Popper put it. And problem solving requires the recognition of problems. You have to be able to spot what the problems are. And then it takes an active effort to address and solve the problems. Popper, as I said, had a lot to say on this subject, mainly thinking about scientific problems, but social problems are going to be the same way. Thomas Edison solved a lot of problems. He was an unbeliever like us. He had a lot of ideas about problem solving. Of course, the problems he tackled were a little different, but problems all kind of fall into the same heap. We should take to heart what Edison had to say about solving problems, and perhaps the essence of all of these is to keep trying. He says in the first quote that he's going to go ahead and make trial after trial until he succeeds. He invented the light bulb and was chided, or somebody pointed out he failed at doing it 1,000 times, and he said, no, the light bulb was an invention with 1,000 steps. He also said we often miss opportunity because it's dressed in overalls and looks like work. And yes, Thomas Edison also was the guy that said that invention or discovery is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Great quote. But I really love that last one there. When you have exhausted all the possibilities, when you think you've tried everything, remember this, you haven't. So if the problem is what to do about the traditional religions that sow hatred and division while also offering something that people seem to need and maybe should need and seek after, then the solution cannot be a knee-jerk banning religion completely. In fact, we see that traditional religions have been trying somewhat to become less hateful and divisive by becoming more, as they say, quote-unquote, liberal. If all the world's Christians were Unitarian Universalists, for example, or Quakers, or even Episcopalians, it would be a step forward. The obstacles that the traditional religions face in trying to become less hateful and divisive are not unlike the obstacles we face in trying to provide a completely godless and superstition-free alternative. Mainly, it is simply inertia. People just keep going with what they're comfortable with and displacing what everyone knows and feels comfortable with because they have never questioned. It's always a challenge to do that. Change takes work and appears threatening to many. Then there are the political and cultural elements that find advantage in hatred and divisiveness, and we have seen many examples of that. One of the biggest obstacles is a set of ridiculous ideas connected with religion, such as that faith is a virtue, that doubt and questioning is immoral, and that religion should be one perfect and unchanging thing. It would be much better if it became recognized and accepted that any religion, just like so many other things, is imperfect, but that it can be, through an effort, through problem solving, be improved and made better. In this, religion can learn from science, which never claims to absolute, final, and infallible truth. Everybody knows the term scientific progress. It's almost a cliche. How about religious progress? What is that? Does anyone know? Any progress in religion is seen as an admission of having been wrong, which is anathema to the established religious traditions and their leaders. But they will never make progress until they admit that they can improve and make an effort to improve. And if real science can get by without certainty, I mean, that's the thing on which we base flying to the moon and doing so many other things, treating cancer and so forth. If real science can get by without certainty, then so can real religion. Of course, science is the same the world over and for everyone, while religion is something that is a little different for everyone, despite what commonalities people may find. In this regard, in science, it is much easier to, as Isaac Newton put it, stand on the shoulders of giants. Even that is difficult when you're working on the frontiers of science. Einstein, after all, overturned Newton. He wasn't standing on his shoulders when he came up with relativity, the special and general theories. Real religion should work like that as well, except everyone is always at the frontiers of making sense of their existence. Importantly, in the individual journey of discovery, it happens that at times we can only learn from our own mistakes. You can't always learn from those of others the way you can in science. And this is another unsolved problem, that real religion does come in overalls, looks like work, and its lessons are sometimes uncomfortable, if not painful. Way of the mythical lemmings that run over cliffs, even though it ends in disaster, despite all that, is an easier path. It takes less effort, and it never feels as if one is wrong. Now, here is an authentic Abraham Lincoln quote. Of course, he was referring to the problem of his time, which was the conflict over slavery that led to the U.S. Civil War. And it is a deep analysis for another time to really unpack this, because much of it turns out what it means to have enemies and friends. Our interests tend to align with our friends. Our enemies' interests tend to be opposed to our own. So that is the problem that needs to be solved there. But this idea is applicable to enemies that are not people. If religion is the enemy, how can it be made a friend? That's really the question. Not how to put science and religion together, but how to turn religion into something useful and good. Well, our approach, the project of the Church of Freethought, is to offer a non-toxic alternative. For ours is a religion of doubt. It is a religion that refuses to tell people what to think, while insisting that people do think and tries to help them think. Because thinking is the only way to get to any belief worth holding, and often it is just better not to believe things. Most importantly, Freethought is a religion that restricts its concerns to the experiential and subjective elements of the human condition, its qualia of what it is like to be who we are. We've talked about the idea of qualia before. The objective world that we all share can be left to science, which has so far done very well without making a lot of headway there. And there's a lot of interest and fascination in science. We take inspiration from science all the time, especially when we do our moments of science. But the inner world of personal, private, and subjective experience, that's really arguably a far larger realm. Certainly not anything that religion should complain about being confined to. That brings us to our principles. Reason, making sense of things. In science, of course, it's easy to check each other's work. We're looking at the same facts, and the process of reasoning is more open. A little bit more difficult in religion, but still, by talking about our differing perspectives, we can get ideas from others and be a little bit more critical about our own ideas and look for ways that we're wrong. As Richard Feynman said, it's not a bad thing to be wrong. Secondly, we want to enjoy this process. The pleasure of finding things out, as Feynman said. Pursuing happiness, which is going to be different for everybody. We can't all agree and are not going to all agree in terms of what makes us happy. Appreciation, by discovering the good, and love, exploring meaning and purpose. It's for us to find our meaning and purpose, and it cannot be imposed by somebody else with some idea. We're not players in a play where somebody else has written the script. We write our own script. That was one of the points of Richard Dawkins in his book, The Selfish Gene, that we are the only species that can look at what our genes drive us to do and try to do better. Doing better, that's our motto. So, a couple things that happened on April 24th in history. This is the traditional date of the fall of Troy in 1183 before the current era, BCE. Here's a painting, somebody imagining the Trojan horse getting in there, and the Trojans, hey, look, we got this great thing the Greeks left us, as they finally give up and sail away. And of course, that was their downfall. And in 1914, the findings of the Frank Hertz experiment were presented to a meeting of physicists in Germany. Frank Hertz experiment, you might not have heard about, but what they were doing was firing electrons through a chamber with a thin vapor of mercury atoms. and then they were measuring the energy that was lost as the electrons hit the mercury atoms. Now, regular theory would predict that there would just be a smooth increase of the accelerating of the collected current on the left versus the accelerating voltage on the bottom axis, and instead they see this stepwise kind of thing. And that was really the thing that really gave legs to the idea of quantized energy levels, and subsequently quantum mechanics. So very important experiment in 1914, results reported. Also on this date, April 24th, in 1916, Shackleton and 5 others departed Elephant Island. Now the story here is that Ernest Shackleton had planned to trek across the Antarctic continent by landing on one side and having another party go to the other side of the continent and lay stores for them over on that side so they could do an overland trek all the way across, crossing the South Pole. First time that had ever been attempted. Unfortunately, his ship, the Endurance, went down in the Weddell Sea, trapped by ice and ultimately crushed by ice and sank, and they had to camp on the ice for quite a long time. And finally, when the ice broke up, they got in their lifeboats and made it to Elephant Island. By the way, they recently found the Endurance at the bottom of the Arctic Ocean in almost perfectly preserved condition. You can look that up. The whole story is just fascinating, but here they were stuck on Elephant Island where there's no people and the whalers would rarely go. And 800 miles away was South Georgia, which they decided to get to by sailing in this lifeboat here, 800 miles across open ocean with nothing to navigate by but just looking at the sun and dead reckoning. When they finally arrived at South Georgia, and that was on May 10th, they were on the wrong side of the island. So after recuperating, they had to climb over the glaciers and mountains, not all of them, I think a party of 2 or 3, to get to Stromness, which was the whaling station on the other side of the island. And they arrived there on May 20th. Apparently, Shackleton himself was nearly unrecognizable when he stumbled into one of the buildings there and identified himself. Just a tremendous story of survival and just determination. Shackleton did not lose any of the people in his party, although I think 2 or 3 people that had gone to the other side of the continent to lay stores were lost. And then also on April 24th, in 1990, the Hubble telescope is deployed from the space shuttle. There you see it being released from the cargo bay, and on the right-hand side being manipulated by the robotic arm to place it into orbit. And you see, crucially, the little lid there, which is going to open up and allow the telescope to look at the stars, is pointed away from the sun so as not to have the sunshine fry the internal circuitry and so forth. So now go to www.churchoffreethought.org, sign up to get the weekly e-newsletter if you would like to participate live when we do these once, well, every Sunday except for the first Sunday when we get together in person. Visit us on Facebook and Twitter. Not a high traffic, it's not going to suck up a lot of your time and energy, but more could be done with that, that's for sure, with both of those. And remember that Freethought is not free. We do not have huge expenses. Nobody is paid a salary. Nobody makes any money off of this. But the more resources we have, the more we can do. And that's really what it's all about, is getting our message out. Supporting your values. You can support your values by supporting the NTCOF. Because we can do together what none of us can do on our own. And we've been running this special now for some while to have a discount on tithing. You get a full 20% discount if you only have to tithe 8% instead of 10%. A little joking there. So join us in promoting facts and reason and celebrating doubt. Demonstrate your commitment. Be the future you wish to see in all things, not just with these kinds of subjects, but however you want the future to be. Set the example. Start with yourself. Thank you very much and good morning. And Melius facet, that's the Latin for do better. And with that, those of us participating live go to an off-the-record Q&A discussion about this service and anything else they want to talk about. Sometimes people bring subjects like, hey, I want to know what my fellow unbelievers and doubters think about this or that, some experience I had or thought, question, something I've puzzled over, and so on. This is a great way to discover community and camaraderie because we share your values. Thank you very much. Good morning.